All right, it is the meat and potatoes, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking athletics, we're talking endurance sports, and we're going to be diving into off-season. When most athletes finish their race season, it's over. Finally, the last one, like a monkey off the back. And the first thing they typically think of is having a break. I'm done. And you know what? That's appropriate and that's smart. You should have a break. After all, ultimately, we always talk about being present, focus, being committed. But we want to be effective with our focus. And if you are constantly always on without reprieve, you're just going to end up with clutter. And this applies to athletics, as we're talking about today. It also applies to life. Getting out, turning your back on the things that are important to you, give you space, and ultimately enable you to return with a fresh lens, rejuvenated energy, and ready to give it vigor. And so it is important somewhere in the middle of your season, typically for an athlete, to have a little rejuvenation, but at the end of the season, have a thorough clean out. And now this is important, a complete break, untethered to any performance lens. It shouldn't be more, though, than about 10 to 21 days at most. I'm going to say that again, somewhere around 10 to 21 days, just over a week to about 3 weeks. And so after that time, a week or two of absolutely glorious randomness and perhaps a little indulgence, then if you're doing it right, you have a fork in the road. And you are going to take that fork towards a wonderful golden platform of opportunity. Because that is the point after your break that you enter what I like to call off-season. Off-season is the opportunity for you to focus on things that you simply are not going to focus on and cannot focus on during the peak phase of training and racing. If I had to sum up off-season, I would call it fun, flexible, and critical for anyone that is on a performance journey. Fun, that sounds good. Flexible, I love a little bit of that, but critical, really, really important. And unfortunately, way too many athletes make the number one golden mistake. And that's after their week or two of a complete structured break, they let that extend to week 3, week 4, week 5, with promises of, I'll stay active, but I want to invest on other parts of my life. But that randomness leads to an element of detraining, a lack of specificity, and no development into the next season. They just regress back to their baseline, and then they re-enter the next year having to rebuild, and it comes with its own catastrophe of performance results, and they don't yield the benefits. And so for off-season, after your break, it's so important for you to hit that fun, hit that flexible, but dive into the critical aspects. I would say, and I've said this every single year for many years, the number one thing that you can do to set yourself up for a huge leap forward in your own personal performance in the coming year, the number one thing, it is the thing, really nailing off-season. And so yet again, for another year, it is my call to action. Dial in your off-season. And so let's define it. Now, we can extend this concept to any performance in any arena, but we're going to focus around the typical athlete here. You have your last race of the year. You enjoy that break. You completely turn your back. You don't even think about the sport. You don't think about training. You don't think about performance. All you're doing is going through a period of decompression and downtime. And then it is the start of your new season. It is off-season. And this critically important phase is going to last pretty long. It's not 3 or 4 weeks. It's actually a major part of the year. I see off-season extending 12 to 18 weeks for some people. So just like any phase of a performance journey, these weeks are going to be highly structured, and they're going to be progressive. In other words, what occurs in your first 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks of off-season is going to evolve dramatically by the time it transitions to week 12, week 13, week 15, week 18, and so on. And so this isn't 4 months of just, it's off-season and it's low. It's progressively building through some structured training, but it is that much of a runway. So let's discuss this. We can't dig into the details of off-season without addressing the common hesitancy and, for lack of a better phrase, pushback from many athletes that declare themselves absolutely unable or unwilling to recommit to some structure. Look, I love the sport, but I just need to go and invest myself into work, into my family, all of the other components. I need to turn my back on it. I'll be back, but I need to invest in these other areas. That's the classic pushback that you get. But let's remember what I said. This is a platform of opportunity. The truth is that many athletes are really desperate to turn their back on the sport at the end of the race season because they actually failed to nail their recipe throughout the season itself. There's the typical off-season approach for many athletes. Big completion of a race season, desperate for a break. They take a huge break. Weeks, months, no structure, just as I talked about before. And then suddenly, it's March, it's time to get going again. I've got a race in May, and I am ambitious, I'm committed, I want to be the best athlete that I can be. But physiologically, I'm behind the 8 ball because I've just had multiple months of no structure. I'm playing catch up. And so what does that athlete do? They ramp the training, typically too aggressively than their body can actually cope with. They often integrate too much training relative to life demands because they're chasing the looming race date. And what occurs? They then go through multiple months of overtraining relative to life demands. They finish the race season again and they're exhausted mentally and physically, and they're desperate. They're almost forced into the break. And so the cycle continues year on year until they end up quitting, or they get really frustrated with the consistent injuries that tend to percolate through many of the seasons, and they just feel like the sport is too consuming relative to life. And suddenly, here's this English geezer saying, do it year round. But there is a sensible, under-the-radar approach to this. I come back. It is your platform of opportunity. Because you're empowered to break the mold. And if you decide to invest in yourself and you take an experiment for 1 year, doing it a little bit different, maybe this year, and dare to evolve from your prior classical approach that probably hasn't yielded the results that you want and certainly has been riddled with frustrations, I am sure, maybe you evolve and you do an experiment on yourself. Let me cement your thinking. You've heard me say many times on this show, consistency is the magic word of performance. And I've also said off-season is the most important part of the year if you want a huge breakthrough. These two things go hand in hand. Rather than going completely random and then accelerating up to an overconsumption of training relative to what your life can really handle, how about just going through a tsunami of under-the-radar training all the way through?